see.
I can monitor it.
Yeah, maybe just check it out every once in a while. So, also, you guys are leaving on the Spanish field trip at Mandarin field trip at 11. Is that right?
11:05.
11:05.
11:05.
Okay. So here's what I was thinking is. I could just post this video too, so you guys can see the end of the lecture like that. Let me just see how many people are leaving too. Raise your hand if you're going on the Mandarin field trip.
I wish.
Okay, so like, okay, that's cool. So here's what we're gonna learn about today.
Yeah,
So,
and we can communicate with
Sam Barkle. So, today is November 14th, 2018.
Oh,
5 days and 29 years ago. I bet one of you know what happened. Somebody mentioned it the other day.
Thanksgiving.
Somebody besides Donovan know what happened? On November 9th, 1989.
Oh, Soviet Union collapsed, right?
Yeah, Berlin Wall fell. So, I would say
Down with communism.
this is probably probably one of the top two most significant events of my life. 11/9 and 9/11, right? Hold on.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
There we go.
I think almost certainly.
Boom. There we go. All right. So here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to tell you about Berlin.
Nice.
But I'm not just going to say, oh, Berlin this, Berlin that. What we're going to do is we're going to learn about Berlin by watching a fictional young girl grow up. So this will be our pretend girl. So again, this is fictional, right? But we're going to pretend that she was born in Berlin in 1910. And heck, maybe she's still alive today, 108 years old, right? So let's look at what she would have seen if she lived in Berlin her whole life, starting in 1910, okay? Let's just give her a very generic German name. How about
Jeff.
Jeff?
Klaus.
Jeff.
How about Heidi?
Yes, Klaus.
Heidi.
No,
This is
Klaus.
Heidi.
Klaus.
I don't like Klaus. Let's go with Heidi. So this is Heidi. So
How about Michael?
when Heidi is 5 years old, her dad goes to World War I. And you know what happens to her dad?
He died.
He dies. You know why he dies?
Gas.
Because it's World War I and everybody died in World War I.
Gas attack.
Or shell shock.
And I'm kind of being serious. So
Guns.
Germans and French, you know, we often learn about World War I through the United States perspective, and it was hell, right? It was a terrible, terrible war. But the German and the French had it really bad. They fought in this war for years, and almost literally an entire generation of men was wiped out. In Paris, on the French side, women of that age wore black for years. Like, imagine all the women in their 20s just wearing black for a few years because all of their husbands had gone off and gotten killed in the war. Like, it literally like wiped out like an entire generation of men. So Heidi's father, if he was a Berliner, would have almost certainly gone off to World War I and died in that war. So that happens to her when she's 5 years old. Now, when she's in her teens, what happens after the war, yep, that's money they're sweeping up. That's what I'm going to tell you about. So what happens after World War I is all the countries that beat Germany, so like France and England and the United States, they're all like, Germany, like, why did you start that war, man? That war was the worst, and you guys started it. It's your fault. Why'd you start that war? You killed so many people, and you know how much money that war cost us? So here's what we're going to do, Germany. We're going to write you a bill, and this is what you owe us for the war. And then they wrote down, like, it's like 0,000,000. Like,
Oh,
Germany,
yeah. Didn't they
here you
charge
go.
them for like every shell that they shot
Yeah.
at Germany?
So they're like, hey, Germany, here's the bill for that war. You owe us this much money. And Germany's like, we don't have that much money. And, you know, all the other sides are like, well, figure it out. You owe us that much money. So Germany's like, man, this is the worst. Like, we just lost all these guys in this war. Now we owe all this money, and they're not going to let us off the hook. Like, I've got an idea. I know where we can get more money.
Print more.
Let's just leave the printing press on. Let's just turn, like the printing press has been printing at a 7. Let's turn it up to 11 and just print some more money, baby. Then we'll have enough money to pay off the debt. And this is what they did. They just printed way more money. Here's the problem with printing too much money. Inflation. So let's pretend you guys see this house, like up in Westlake, and it's on a hill. It's like $3 million. You're like, man, that is the sweetest house. I want that house. The problem is I've only got like $35. It's $3 million. Like, where am I going to get this house? And then Donald Trump, let's say he's like, I want to make everybody a millionaire. I'm a millionaire. It's great. I'm going to make everybody in America a millionaire. So we're just going to print more money and give everybody $10 million. Sounds good.
I'm down.
I'm into it, right? Now you can get that house, right? No, you can't. Because the guy selling the house for $3 million is not going to sell the house for $3 million anymore if everybody just gets $10 million out of thin air. Because now $3 million is not very much money, right? So I don't know what he's going to sell it for, but it's probably going to be more like $100 million, or like an insanely large amount. Like maybe billions, who knows, right? Like it changes the value of money. So what happened in Germany was as they're printing more money, money started becoming worthless. So what would happen is, and this happens in countries today, like this is happening in Venezuela right now, where you have like hyperinflation. The price of money changes even throughout the day. So in Germany, you would be paid not once a month, not once a week, you'd be paid like 2 or 3 times a day. So they'd pay, you'd go to work in the morning and then they'd pay you for that morning. And you run to the store and you'd buy your eggs. Because the store is raising their prices every day. They have a guy like who works at the store now who just goes to the store and is like, just putting like new prices on everything all day long, right? He's probably writing it back then. But they're changing the prices all day, every day. And you're getting paid more and more, but the price of things is going up higher and higher. So in Venezuela right now, there's been so much inflation that it's hard to even like measure or state how bad the inflation is. But here's a measurement that this guy invented like in the last year to kind of measure how bad things are in Venezuela. Let's take your wage and just see how many calories it can buy you, right? And with the cheapest calories, let's say like all the money you make is just gonna buy calories. How much could you make? Now if you, in the United States, just went and got a job at like Dairy Queen, you're earning what, $8 an hour? How many? And you're gonna just buy the cheapest calories. Like I don't even know what that'd be, like rice or bread or something like that.
It's rice and beans.
Even that rice and beans probably, right? Even that is gonna, you're gonna get way more than your 10,000 calories a day. You work like 40 hours a week at minimum wage. You're gonna get enough calories to stay alive for sure, right? Probably a lot more. In Venezuela, about 5 years ago, you could the average wage could probably get you like 50,000 calories a day. Today, it's more like low hundreds. The average wage would get you like low hundreds. So that is not enough for you to even sustain yourself, let alone sustain a family, let alone pay rent and transport and all that stuff, right? And in Germany, there's a very similar situation. Money is becoming worth less and less. You might be getting paid 3 times as much as you were last year, but eggs cost 50 times as much, right? And money became so worthless that people just stopped using it. So imagine like a $1 bill right now. It's not worth that much, but it's worth something, right? Like if I found a $1 bill, I'd pick it up. It's worth like $1. Yeah. But imagine if they started printing $1,000 bills. And like, now, imagine a year from now, a loaf of bread costs like $1,500, right? $1 is not worth very much anymore. $1 is almost like a penny. I walk by a penny and I'm like, sometimes I pick it up. Actually, I usually pick it up because I'm kind of a cheapskate. But sometimes I'm like, I don't know what's on that penny. There's like a little grime on that. Like, I don't feel like bending over. Right? I'm old and I've got a bad back now. I'm just going to leave it, Like imagine if that happened with $1 bills. Where there's just like a $1 bill can't buy you anything. A loaf of bread is $1,500. What about when a loaf of bread goes up to like $100,000? They've got $1 billion bills.
Trucks of cash.
They've got $1 trillion bills. What's a $1 bill going to get you? It's like worth way less than a penny. Way less than a penny. And a $1,000 bill. What happens when a $1,000 bill is worth less than a penny? $1 bills really aren't worth anything. So people started doing other stuff with money. Like some people would like wallpaper their house with money just because they couldn't afford any other paper, right? People started using it to like start fires, just because like you couldn't even really afford any other paper to start your fire. So it's like, well, let's use the $1 bills. Here's a fun one. Kites. We can't afford other stuff to make a kite, but we've got plenty of these 1 Deutschmark bills lying around, right? So money became worthless. So Heidi, as she was in her teens, this is the world she lived in. Very poor, money had almost no value. It was a really rough place to live. Here's kids just sleeping on the street in Berlin. It was a very, very impoverished society in which she grew up in her teens, right? And then when she gets into her 20s, this guy comes along. And Berlin was kind of the capital of this new movement of the Nazi Party. And at first, this guy sounded great. It's not like he just kind of came out and said, hey, I'm going to gas 6 million Jews right off the bat. Like, that kind of happened later. At first, this guy sounded like the solution. Berlin's government, before Hitler, had been changing hands, like, left and right. Like, I forget the exact numbers, but it was something like, they had like 12 different governments in like 8 years. And when I say 12 different governments, I don't mean like they impeached a guy and then elected a guy. I mean they like took the Constitution and like ripped it up. And we're like, okay, this Constitution's done. We're gonna write a new Constitution now. And they write a new Constitution. And then like 8 months later, those guys get overthrown and they're like, no, that's not the Constitution. Write a new Constitution. So there was no stability in the government. People are impoverished. Inflation's out of control. And Hitler comes along and things kind of start to change, right? He starts giving these speeches that probably sounded pretty great if you were an impoverished German who grew up in poor Berlin. About how, the German race, blah, 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 and he's going to fix things and make things better, right? We got a hand. What do you got?
I just wanted to say that he also brought up the point of the bill they had been given for that war as a point. He said we shouldn't have had to pay that. He was a big morale booster, and although the general idea is they couldn't have voted for him, as you said, he was the popular vote because he boosted morale for the German people. And he didn't actually, in the first of his campaign, start off with like eugenics and everything, but he did say like we're a populace that has been wrongly victimized by the other European nations.
Totally.
That.
And to a lot of people, it sounded great.
Yeah.
When she's 26 years old, the Olympics comes through Berlin.
Oh man.
That must have been something,
1936.
right?
Yeah.
This was probably a pretty exciting time. Like you've got new leadership. Things look like they're starting to change. Berlin's all of a sudden kind of the center of the world for a little bit of time. And World War II eventually kicks off. You guys all know that's coming, right? So she's, like in her late 20s, early 30s as World War II rages. We're going to go ahead and say she gets married somewhere in there, and that her husband goes off and dies in World War II, because that's what all the men did in World War II. Let's go ahead and even say that her husband died on the Eastern Front, fighting against the Russians.
Oh God.
Okay? Here's more Olympics. So here's, we're going to go over World War II a little quickly here, but towards the end of World War II, here's what happened. So early World War II, it looks like the Nazis are just kicking butt and taking names, right? Like they're toppling countries left and right. Like they've got all this new military technology and strategy. And then they attack Russia, and it's like, whoa, Russia? Oh man, this is harder than we thought it was going to be, right? And by about 1944, the tides had changed. By summer 1944, everybody kind of knew the Nazis were going to lose the war. It just wasn't quite over yet. It's kind of like when the football game's like 35-17 and there's 6 minutes left. It's like, something crazy could happen, but like the clock's running out on World War II here, right? And what happened was all these countries that were fighting against the Nazis. So we've got United States, England or Britain, Russia, and a lot of other ones, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. You've got all these allied countries, right? And it's kind of like a game of Risk. Who's played Risk?
Not fun.
Oh, cool.
Pretty fun.
Yeah, so it is pretty fun. Yeah. So Risk, in Risk, you've got 6 players. And here's what happens in a lot of Risk games. 5 people team up to get one dude out of the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 5 people team up, and even if it's the strongest person, he's not as strong as the other 5 put together, right? So a lot of times 5 people team up and kind of knock somebody out. But what's funny is while these 5 people are teamed up, there's also like a sub-competition between those 5 people. Because they know that when this 6th person is knocked out, now it's the 5 of them and they're all fighting against each other. So there's this jostling for position that happens as you're knocking the one person out. Everybody else is working together, but they're also knowing that they're going to be enemies
Like 6 people
when it's
on a
all
horse,
said
but
and
the
done.
horse can only hold one.
A little bit.
What?
So this is what was kind of happening towards the end of World War II. Is all these countries know, okay, we're probably going to beat the Nazis eventually, but what's going to happen afterwards? What's Russia going to control? What's England going to control? What's the United States going to control? What's France going to control? Right? Who's going to get what? And Berlin was the capital of the Nazi Party. Berlin, going into World War II, was one of the largest cities in the world. And there kind of became a race to Berlin. The Allies, from the West, you had the Brits and, the United States and France and all these guys kind of racing towards Berlin. And from the East, you had Russia. And everybody kind of wanted to get to Berlin first. Well, nobody got there until the summer of 1945, and guess who wins the race? The Russians. The Russians get to Berlin first. Now, hang on.
Didn't we actually let them? Didn't we actually pull back and let them take it?
Not that I know of. If there was a point where that happened, I might just not be aware of it.
Okay.
But
I thought I heard that from some other class or something.
I don't know. I could be wrong.
Do you know
Maybe
a
that did
reason
happen.
for why
For
we would have done that?
allying with us because of.
The part I know about the most is in the summer of 1944, the plan was, Paris got liberated in 1944, and originally the plan was that they were going to actually go around Paris because they just wanted to at least get into Germany before the winter of 1944 hit, which they didn't do. They ended up going into Paris, and they also ended up not really even penetrating Germany. So I've never heard that we pulled back and let the Russians do that, but maybe it happened. Maybe it was right at the end. Maybe there's a reason behind that, and I just don't know about it. So that's good. If you look further into that, let's talk later about it. But the Russians get there first, right? So here's the thing about Russia with the war. And some of you probably already know this, but Russia lost so many soldiers in the war. They had almost as many soldiers killed as all the other countries in the war combined, right? Russia lost so many millions of people. So if you were still a Russian soldier that was alive in 1945, how did you get there? Who are the soldiers that actually got to Berlin in 1945? Now you might be thinking, it's the guys who are just so lucky, or the guys who are just the best fighters. No, all those guys died. All the lucky guys were dead, but their luck ran out by 1945.
Lucky enough.
All the best fighters, it didn't matter. You're a good fighter. This is World War II, man. It was crazy. Here's something about the
Surgeons and
Russians.
chefs.
The Russians used to have more humans than guns when they went into some of their battles.
Oh, yeah.
And they would just tell everybody, run that way. And when another Russian with a gun dies, pick up that gun and use it.
Go bodies on a line.
Right? And if you turn around and run the other way because this is freaking nuts, we will gun you down. They had Russians lined up behind the battle to shoot other Russians that were running from the battle. Right? So everybody got killed. So if you were a Russian soldier still in the military by 1945, you were from the backwoods of Siberia, and they just couldn't recruit you until then, right? You were probably young. You're probably 17. And the only reason you didn't get killed earlier is because your house was so far away in the middle of the woods or something like that, that they really just didn't get to you until they really needed to because everybody else was dead already, right? So these Russian soldiers move into Berlin. Now here's what the Berliners did. So first of all, remember, her husband, he already went off and got killed a few years ago. All the men in Berlin had already been off in war, right, and died. So what you had in Berlin was young boys, old men, and women. And they said everybody has to fight. Every male who is able-bodied in Berlin has to fight. And if you don't fight, you get hung in the street. And they put a sign on you saying you're a traitor. And this happened. So when the Russians get to Berlin, they have to literally take over Berlin one building at a time for the whole city. Because the Berliners are not surrendering. Because if they surrender, they get hung. So, first of all, the people from Berlin fighting are, let's say it's her son now is fighting. So these are the boys that were fighting in Berlin against the Russians coming in. Some of these boys are pretty young.
Our age, 15, 14.
Probably even younger. Look at this one.
12.
Right?
Man, that
Like we're
guy's
talking like
The gun is his.
Like 9.
He's literally like as large as
9,
that
8.
gun.
12 was actually the youngest age I think they recruited, but they could have done younger probably without saying it.
and you got the old man,
Come on, you got him.
right? So we're gonna go ahead and say Heidi's son was one of these kids. He's killed in the siege on Berlin.
Oh my god.
I'm telling you, man. And she's Heidi had a bad life, she says, and Heidi's only like 35 right now. You just keep on waiting.
This isn't the Swiss
Um,
ID.
So again, the Russians come in, and it's not like they just move into Berlin and Berlin surrenders. They take Berlin one building at a time. So pretty much every building, again, one of the largest cities in the world, pretty much every building in Berlin had bullet holes or was just completely knocked down. So here's just some pictures of like the rubble, right? Massive fighting. One building at a time. So Heidi sees all this. Her son dies in these battles, right? What do you got?
I mean, there's a reason if you go visit Germany. Most of the big cities are like big blocky squares.
Oh, we'll get to those. We'll get to
They all
those.
got
So,
decimated.
um,
Yeah.
so what happens is the Russians win, right? They move in and win. And again, a lot of these Russians had never seen anything like a city like Berlin. A lot of these guys who moved into Berlin had grown up like and spent their whole lives like in very remote parts of Russia that were, and Berlin's like one of the most metropolitan, most happening cities in the world, right? There's kind of an old joke that like maybe there's some truth to it. Like I kind of doubt this ever happened, but like maybe it actually did. I don't know. But there's jokes about these Russian soldiers, like they'd never seen running water before, some of them, and they get to Berlin and they see like faucets, like water that comes out of the wall, and they're like, "Whoa! Like I want that in Russia." And they would like take the sinks out and take them back to their homes in Russia, and then like they couldn't figure out why it didn't work. Like they couldn't figure out why they couldn't get water to come out of it. You know, like that's again one of those ones where like maybe it never happened, maybe it's kind of a joke, but it does tell you something about like what these Russian soldiers were probably actually like. Like they'd never seen anything like Berlin, and they come in and destroy it. And then what they do is they said, "Hey, the Germans caused this. We're not cleaning this city up. We're going to make the Berliners clean up their own city. They're the reason the city's like this." Well, the only people still really alive in Berlin are the women, right? So they made the women clean up the rubble. So here's pictures of just women cleaning rubble.
She's just carrying a brick.
Like 6 bricks.
Yeah, but she did that all day for like most of
Yeah, that's
1946.
true.
So this is what happened. They made him clean up the city. And so after the war ended, I'm going to go to the whiteboard here. After the war ended, what happened was all these countries that beat the Nazis were like, "Hey, we're not just going to give these cities back. You know, like we're going to stay in these cities for a while and make sure nothing gets out of control." But then the question is like, well, who gets to run these cities? Russia, United States, England, what? So they actually divided up most of these cities. So Berlin, Vienna, Budapest, all these different, like kind of like Eastern European cities that had been controlled by the Nazis, they all kind of get divided up like this. This is how they usually got divided. Usually Russia pretty much got like half the city. They usually got the eastern half of the city. And then the rest of the city was divided up like this. USA got some, England got some, and then France always got the tiniest sliver, right? And we could go into why
so
that
much.
is. We could go into why that is, but we'll talk about that.
it now?
Well, now
Germany.
they've been given back to these other countries. And a lot of them were given back in the mid-50s. Like Budapest, I think, was occupied until like 1955 or something like that. Same with
It's probably
Vienna.
15 years after.
And some of
10
them,
years after.
actually, I'm oversimplifying that. Some of them ended up more or less being taken over by the Soviet Union. So like Budapest was occupied like this for a while, and then it eventually just became all Soviet Union. But Berlin, I'm going to tell you the story of. What do you got?
England actually wanted to completely dissolve the German state entirely. They just wanted to just break it, like Germany's done, we'll just take.
All the effort.
We'll split it up forever.
Public,
But
nothing.
the USA were actually like, no, we need to.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we should not split them up.
Oh, I
Because
didn't know
that could have really led to a third world war. Again, if you split them up and like, oh, here you are all now part of our countries. Like it'd
Yeah.
be like a civil war between all of these, like back at
Wow.
the big.
Well, to a certain extent,
Yeah,
this is
that
actually the
happened.
story of Berlin. This kind of did happen with Berlin. And I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's
kinda
that-
tell you
I mean,
Yeah,
imagine
England-
if that was an entire nation. Like
England didn't want to
Could've been
build
pretty
walls.
bad.
They just wanted to break up Germany, give all the land to other European countries forever. Like never give it back.
What do you think
Interesting.
the theoretical positive effects of that could have been?
of breaking it up.
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, I don't. It seems to me like it wasn't like well thought out, like philosophy and theory that went into the breaking of it up. It was more like, well, we don't want to give it all to those guys, and they don't want to give it all to us, and this is the compromise, you know. And it was probably a very small group of people that decided to do it like this, you know. Like it was probably mostly like Winston Churchill, Roosevelt, Charles de Gaulle,
It'd be
Stalin.
Truman. It'd
You
be
know.
Truman at the end of the World War II. Would be.
Yeah. So here's how most of these cities got divided up, including Berlin, right? But Germany itself also got divided. So let's draw. This is my rendition of Germany, right? That's probably the best 2-second map you'll ever see of Germany, and the worst map of Germany you'll ever see.
Like a jigsaw
So-
puzzle.
Germany itself got divided into East Germany and West Germany. And the intention was that East Germany is going to be controlled by the Soviet Union, and East Germany is going to be communist. And West Germany is going to be free and non-communist.
Like north and south.
So they divided it more or less like that. And I think a lot of people think Berlin was just on that line. That is not correct. You want to know where Berlin is?
Correct.
Berlin is like deep in Eastern territory. So the idea was that this is west, this is east. But then Berlin, you've got also east and west. So like let's just say like communism is white and striped is non-communism or like free, right? So it's like this. So you get this weird little island of like capitalism surrounded by communism, and that's called West Berlin. And then East Berlin is communist. So as Heidi moves into her 40s, which is in the 1950s, she's living in communist East Berlin, right? And what's happening is there's no wall yet or anything like that, but literally like half the city's communist, half of it's not. And what happened was after about a decade of this, a lot of people who lived in East Berlin were kind of like, hey, you know what the thing is about communism? I kind of don't like it at all. And you know, their friends might be like, yeah, I kind of think it's the worst ever. Like, I've been thinking about moving to West Berlin. Me too. You guys want to move together? Yeah. And you know, like the moving trucks are just like only going west, right? There's not really actually moving trucks, but you know what I mean? Like everybody's just like actually leaving East Berlin and just moving to West Berlin. Because all you have to do is like literally go on the other side of the street and you're not in communism anymore. So the communists are like, well, this isn't good, right? Like we're losing everybody. They're all moving to the west. So they decided to build a wall. So in 1961, when Heidi is 41 years old, no, sorry, 51 years old, pretty much overnight, a wall gets built in the middle of Berlin,
Just like that.
dividing the city in half, just like that. It literally happened almost overnight. It took them a few weeks to kind of like fill in the last holes, 1961. So, let me get my slideshow back up. Is that showing? I think it will in a second. So, you've got this wall goes up. So there's an old joke. The wall went up so fast, there's an old joke that there were people in West Berlin who went to spend the night at their in-laws' house in East Berlin and got stuck for 38 years. And that's one of those jokes that probably actually did happen, right? Because like when the wall went up, whatever side you were on, you were stuck, man. Especially if you're on the east, there's no more crossing. And again, it did take a few weeks to like patch it all up, you know? Like I think there's one spot where for a few weeks, it was like the wall went into a building and you could go up to the second floor of the building and like jump into West Berlin. And there were like lines of people like, you know, like jumping into West Berlin, but eventually they closed that off. So here they are building the wall.
Just do some parkour.
Here's the wall. And it was actually two walls. So this is no man's land. right? So there's a wall and a wall. This is from the west. So the west had all this graffiti. We'll talk about that in a second. This was the east. And there was no man's land, so that way, if somebody was trying to jump over the wall and escape, they had to cross this, and there were guard towers over here, and they could shoot you as you're trying to cross. The guard towers all could see each other, too, so if a guard tried to escape, another guard could shoot him.
So
Right.
would the people on the capitalist side of the wall, would they shoot people trying to come and join them?
No, the capitalist side was often welcoming people who escaped.
Was there like
It was more the
ladders or
east.
staircases
Yeah,
on
did
the
they like
on the
did they
no
put
man's land?
stairs to help people?
No!
It was communist. It was the communist.
Wait, so would the
it was,
East like shoot down their
Like with yeah.
own
They're-
people or
yes.
just people entering?
Yeah.
The East would shoot down their own people. The East was not
Nobody
concerned with
wanted
people
to enter
entering
the
the East nearly as much as they were concerned with people escaping the East.
Not that anyone wanted to enter the East.
So which did the cat?
You know, they wanted to see what you were doing there, you know, because there was a spy issue too. But there were not a whole lot of people trying to hop the wall to join communism.
Mike, can we see that?
And
Were there
if they were, they'd
capitalists?
probably just welcome them with open arms. Yeah.
Did the capitalist West help build that secondary wall, or is that still East Berlin just in that no man's land?
Yeah, no, so yeah,
that's
technically,
the actual border wall, but that's okay. That's just to make like
yeah,
it's not
technically,
an actual
East
no man's
Berlin
land,
starts
then.
right here. So this was all done by the East.
So it's not really no man's land in that.
It's
sense,
like
because
it's-
that's
it's-
all still
yeah.
East. So that's
harder to
Like
that's like a
legally,
pseudo
it's
no
East
man's
Berlin.
land. Okay.
Yeah, but
Wait.
yeah,
So you can
Which
even
one?
like show a no
Wait,
man's
East or
land.
Western? Which one was?
East was communist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the way I always remember it is it's just closer to like the USSR / Russia, right? Like East is that way, right? Let's see what other pictures I got. Here's another picture of it. That's again looking at the East. So you know, starting when she's 51. Yeah, what do you got?
So if people were living in East Germany but then moved to West Berlin, how would that happen?
You couldn't.
So West
Yeah.
Berlin would just be cut off?
Yeah, West Berlin was literally like walled all around it, and there
But
were
then how could you get
But there
to
was
West
like a
Berlin
train
or out of West Berlin?
from West.
So, when the wall went up, this is a great question. When the wall went up, West Berlin is like the weirdest island of capitalism on earth, right? Like, it's like, literally, you're surrounded on all sides by communism. So, how do they even get stuff from the West?
Wasn't there a
right?
train? My dad visited West.
Yep, and
West
they
Berlin.
could still like truck stuff across, but the truckers would be like timed. Like when you enter East Germany, you got so
Oh
much
my
time
gosh.
to get to East Berlin or to
Time
West
is
Berlin, right? So like it was, and what a scary place to be. So you want to know what happened to West Berlin? Everybody left. Like a lot of people were just like, whoa! I don't know if you guys have noticed, but like there's a wall all the way around us now, and it's communism everywhere, and this is scary. And I've got a flight out of here on Tuesday, and we're moving to Frankfurt or something like that, right? Like we're out of here, man. Like I've got some relatives in Mississippi, and we're just anything sounds better than here, right? So like a lot of people just left West Berlin. Now again, this was one of the largest cities in the world. So when everybody just leaves one of the largest cities in the world, real estate prices plummet. Like it becomes like the cheapest place to live in the world because like all the buildings are empty. So guess who moves in when real estate gets really cheap?
Hipsters.
Hipsters and artists, right? So West Berlin, during all of this, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, West Berlin was like the counterculture capital of the world. Like Iggy Pop and David Bowie moved to West Berlin in the 80s and became roommates. Who knew, right? So like maybe 3 times in my life I've met somebody whose parents lived in West Berlin like in the 70s or 80s, and I've always been like, wait, your parents lived in West Berlin? They're like, yeah. I'm like, were your parents like total hippies? And they're like, oh yeah, big time. Like the biggest, right? So hence like the graffiti on the wall. You know what I mean? So
It's like free
but-
real estate for graffiti.
it kind of was, you know? So Heidi is living on the east though. And she really can't even see the West. You know, she's not seeing at all what's going on in West Berlin or really the rest of the world. All of the news in East Berlin is very much just like made by the government and dished right to them. Here's a guard tower. Oh, let's talk a little more about the wall. This is a really famous picture of a guard helping somebody escape. And I think I could be wrong, but I think they don't even really know who this kid was. Here's another really famous picture. This is of a guard who like just kind of like looked around and just decided to go for it. And this is him dropping his gun and being about to run to the west. And I believe somebody just happened to have their camera out, like focused on him when he did this, and they snapped the photo. So these are like two of the most famous
What did
pictures.
they get him?
I can't remember. And I actually can't remember if they got him, and I can't remember if we even know what happened to him. But I bet you could look it up pretty easily. People did totally try to escape from east to west through the most creative means you can imagine. My
Wasn't
favorite.
there tunnels or
There
something
were
like that?
people tried to build tunnels. People tried to build hot air balloons that would float over.
Isn't there one successful? Oh,
I don't know, but probably. So my favorite escape attempt was, so there was one checkpoint in the middle of Berlin called Checkpoint Charlie. And this was like, if you were going to go from east to west or west to east, you had to go through Checkpoint Charlie. It was like really the only break in the wall, right? Now, nobody could really go unless you had crazy permission to do this, that, or the other, right? But, you know, they had one of those things that would kind of go like that to let a car pass and then go down. So there was a guy from East Berlin who takes his car, and the part where the windshield meets the car, like, you know, like where the windows are, he saws it off. But he leaves it on the car. So basically the top half of the car is still on the car, but he is sawed all the way around.
Oh,
so it's
I
not
remember this.
attached.
Yeah.
And he kind of lines it up with Checkpoint Charlie and hits the gas and gets up to speed, and then right before he hits it, he just ducks. The pole rips the whole top half of his car off, and he just cruises in his new convertible right into West Berlin.
And they can't do anything because now he's on West Berlin, so they
Totally.
can shoot him.
He-
That's a
yeah.
crime.
So, after that, they made it like winding concrete, so you couldn't just like gun it and like do that. Yeah, like, that was a one-time only trip.
You know, he should have brought like a bus full of people.
Yeah. Everybody done now!
You see like 5 heads just pop up in this thing.
So East Berlin, let's go back to Heidi. She's 51, wall goes up, and I mean, Berlin is still so damaged from the war. I mean, even today, when you go to Berlin, there's bullet holes everywhere, right? There's buildings that have not been repaired today, 2018, from the war. And I'm not talking like 3 buildings that are a tourist attraction. I'm talking like, there's buildings all over Berlin that still haven't been repaired today. All over the place. A lot of them are still empty, huh?
Do people live in them?
Yeah, a lot of people squat in these buildings. I've even got pictures of that a little later in the slideshow.
Physically squatters out.
Like have been living in these buildings for like 30
Squatters
years.
are like people.
There are people who've been living in these abandoned buildings for like decades for free, right? They're squatting in these buildings. So what happens though is the communists now control East Berlin, and they start building stuff like this. Commie block apartment buildings. They all look the same. They all look so identical that there was a point where like kids would come home from school and like get lost, you know, like 7-year-old kid like, wait, what building's mine? So like at one point they finally put like statues of animals in front of each building. So you'd have like I live in the elephant building, you know, like I live in the giraffe building.
Itchy lot.
But then it's just like this bland, vanilla, like commie apartment building like this. Yeah.
In Bulgaria, they paint all of them different colors and have numbers on them to tell the difference, but they all look exactly the same, just like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, what do you got, Donovan?
Like, you know, I said there's still bullet holes like in Berlin.
Mhm.
'Cause there's still bullet holes at UT from the UT Tower shooting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's still bullet holes, I suspect, in a lot of parts of the world where things have happened. But in Berlin, there's bullet holes on like every building. You know what I mean? There are, of course, in Berlin nowadays, newer buildings that were built, you know,
Yeah.
last year or 20 years ago. But like, there's bullet holes everywhere in Berlin. They're all over the place, you know? Here's another funny thing about these apartment buildings is one of the things the communists were all about was showing how awesome communism is. Like, capitalism? Yeah, it's the worst. Communists have it the best. Oh, can I go over and see capitalism? No, you don't want to go over there. It's terrible. It's terrible. We're so rich in communist land, right? So in the 60s when they were building buildings, this is kind of like where in a lot of parts of the world, they started putting elevators in everything, right? Like nowadays...
Oh, there's those really weird ones. They're like step-on elevator. Yeah.
Well, that's not where I'm going with this, but
I saw
follow
a
me
post
here,
about
follow
that.
me. So, you know, nowadays, any new building is going to have an elevator pretty much. We've even got an elevator in building 4 that nobody ever uses for the 2-story building, right? For like handicap access. And that's great, right? But like, there was a point 100 years ago where like, you'd have a 6-story building with no elevators. Like, all buildings were built with no elevators because elevators didn't exist yet. So by the 1960s, it's kind of like where like the world had gotten rich enough to just build elevators in all these buildings. Except communism's not actually that rich, right? They want to show how rich they are, but they can't really afford to put elevators in all these buildings. So what they did was they did put elevators in all these new buildings, but they didn't have enough money to let the elevators stop at every floor. So the standard is the elevators stop on every 3rd floor. So they stop on like the 1st floor, 4th floor, 7th floor, 10th floor. So I had a buddy who lived in Berlin like 10 years ago, and he lived on the 8th floor. And I was like, wait, so the elevators doesn't stop on your floor? And he's like, no, it stops 1 below me and 2 above. And I'm like, so which one do you use? How do you do it? And he's like, well, I like to go downstairs. So when I leave in the morning, I walk from the 8th down to the 7th, get on the elevator there. But when I come home, I just go all the way up to the 10th and then walk down 2 flights. Because to me, that's easier than going up 1 flight of stairs. I'm like, all right. A lot of these still had like wood-burning heat too. So my buddy who lived in one of these buildings, he lived in one of these like 10 years ago, one of these commie block apartments. He didn't have central heating. Everything was still done with wood, right? So when he would take a shower, and Berlin gets cold, man, it's north. When he would take a shower, he'd have to make a wood fire to heat up the water for his shower. And he said he didn't really know the stoves very well when he first moved in. And one time he's like, man, it's so cold. I just want to take like a long, warm shower. I'm going to put so much wood in here. And he like packed it with wood, and it like exploded all over his living room with like burning logs in his room. He was like, hey man, you can't put that much wood in. It's like, oh, lesson learned, right? But that's what these apartments were like, right? Here's another picture of them. Okay, so products, right? So while East Berlin was under communism, the communists pretty much had like one of everything. When you go to the store, they've got oil, but they don't have 12 kinds of olive oil and avocado oil and, you know, all this stuff. It's like they've got like one kind of cooking oil. They've got one kind of sugar. They've got one kind of coffee. They've got one pair of shoes. They've got one pair of boots. You want boots? Everybody has those same boots.
Stalin's finest
right?
boots.
Cars. There's one kind of car. TVs. One kind of TV. And the government makes all of it. None of this Nike, none of this Levi's. No, you know, like, the government makes everything, and there's one kind of everything.
Communism?
Now, huh?
Could you privatize communism?
I don't even know what that means.
Like,
right?
only
Only
one
the
brand
English
makes
can privatize
everything,
communism.
and for only one
But
brand.
it's not
a lot of this old stuff has kind of become like collector's items, right? Like I kind of like wish I had communist like jeans. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
I know,
The problem is
but,
they
like,
probably fell apart 20
What
years
if
ago.
Nike only made one kind of shoe, and it's the only kind of shoe you can get? And then what if
That's
Levi's is
Oh.
the only kind of jeans
Well,
you can get?
so
But
here's
they just turned that into communism.
yeah, gotcha. So the problem is though, is if Nike just made one pair of shoes, and Adidas made 10 pairs of shoes, and people liked
No, but
variety
it's only
better.
Nike. Like,
Like Nike has
there's
monopoly?
one company that makes one thing, and
And
there's
that's-
one company for everything.
The thing is it was the government would employ people, so there was no companies that would employ people that would make any. They wouldn't have any financial gain. So it was just the government.
I
had
think, yeah, I
factories.
think I see what you're saying, and like in theory, yes, that could totally happen, right? And to a certain extent, you do get a little of that in a place like China, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's the search engine there? Is it Baidu?
Yeah.
Is that the name of the search
Bai-
engine?
yeah.
Right, like Google is not allowed to come in and compete in China, but Baidu is a private company, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's like there's one product. It's kind of a monopoly. It's kind of communistic, I guess.
It's still private
And it is still private, right?
Yeah.
So that does kind of,
Yeah.
you know, that is a way of bridging the gap, right?
Yeah, that's
but
true.
back in these days, that's not what's happening. Government makes everything, and there's one of everything, and it's all pretty low quality, and it's all cheap. That was the thing, is cars were so affordable that anybody could afford a car, but they didn't have enough cars. So you had to be on a waiting list for like 20 years to get your car. And a lot of times the cars were given out to people who were kind of friends with people in the government, or given out as bribes or things like that, right?
The cars are supposed to be pretty solid. Like people like in like rural Russia still have them.
I'm sure they do, but people in Cuba are also driving like, you know,
Yeah,
a
that's
58 Chevys, and it's not because they're old car aficionados,
No,
right?
they fixed it with their washing machine.
They fixed it with their washing machine and black market duct tape.
Yeah.
But this is a typical store, right? You go in, there's no variety, and there's not really that much stuff. So let's move on. So she lives in this for her 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? Yeah.
What's the most commonly spoken language? Is it Russian or German?
German. Yeah, because people in Germany had grown up speaking German, you know. But let's see. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, November 9th, 1989, right? So what happens is, so the communists made all the news, right? Like all the news was just like propaganda. And one day, and you know, okay, so one day this guy goes on the news, just a total newscaster, and he's kind of like in an interview type scenario. And this stuff was just standard. They'd go on and they'd just say stuff, and sometimes they'd talk about how bad the West is. And the plan was they were going to go on and say, hey, we're going to issue travel visas so anybody can travel to the West. But in reality, they're only going to issue like 100 of these visas, and nobody was actually going to get these visas, you know. But on the news, they're going to say, yes, we allow people to go to the West, and nobody likes it. We're going to issue travel visas. But the newscaster didn't really read over his script beforehand. He also probably had quite a bit of vodka before he went on the air. And he goes on, and he's just reading, you know, like probably not even paying attention to what he's reading, and he says something like, yes, we're going to issue travel visas so people can travel to the West. And one of the reporters, and this is in Berlin, one of the reporters says, wait, you're going to issue travel visas so people can travel to the West? And he says, and he gets flustered, and you can actually look this up on YouTube and watch it with translation. It's all in German, but it basically says like, yes, people can go to the West with these visas. And they go, who can get these visas? And he's kind of flustered a little bit, and he goes, anybody. And they go, when can we get these visas? And he goes, immediately. And what happens is people in East Berlin literally see that on the news and are like, I'm going right now. Like, start walking down the stairs, bump into Henry, and I'm like, Henry, did you hear the news? He's like, no, I just went in line for bread for 3 hours. And I'm like, oh, they're issuing visas to the West. And Henry's like, no way. I'm like, yes, right now. And then, you know, Ethan's coming down the stairs, and he's like, did you see the news? I'm going to go get one of those visas. We're like, yeah, let's do it. And pretty much like all of East Berlin just walks to the wall at the same time, sparked by this like random accidental news story, right? And people get to the wall, you know, and the border guards, they didn't know anything was going to happen. So they've got like, you know, their regular 6 guys there probably on shift. And they're like, holy smokes, there are a lot of people out there. And everybody's like, we want our visas. And they're like, we don't even know what you're talking about. And they're like, we're going to the West. And the guy's like, okay. And that's pretty much how the Berlin Wall fell. That is pretty much how communism toppled. Like that. It was like, now there'd been a lot leading up to that, right? But this was like the straw that broke the camel's back. This was like the first spark that ignited the fire, which was the collapse of communism.
The things we love the most.
1989. So this was 29 years and 5 days ago, exactly.
5 days.
And I'll take hands in a second, but here's pictures from that day. These are all from that day. People literally started ripping the wall down. Just pulling it down and pulling it apart.
Pretty cheap wall.
Yeah,
well,
communist.
You know, let's throw a couple 100,000 people out there and we'll see what, you know, they can rip it down. It's not like they just knocked it down, right? They brought out their hammers and whatnot.
That's like...
and actually today, when you go to Berlin, most of the wall isn't there. Because they literally just ripped it down like out of fury, right?
Yeah.
There's nobody on site in 1989. Like, we should really think about historical preservation, right? It was more just like, we're ripping it down! Like, I'm gonna keep this hunk for my kids!
Yeah, and people, there are like so many hugs to the wall that still exist.
Oh yeah, I've got a little piece of the wall. Eventually there was some guy who's like, I'm gonna sell these.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like tiny. But I am very confident in this piece of the wall, but I mean, geez, it can just be spray painted concrete too, for all I know. Like, we could just run down to Castle Hill and grab a piece of concrete and be like, hey, check it out, Berlin Wall, dude, 1989, who knew?
Dude,
all right, Donovan.
The Berlin Wall has officially been down longer than it's been up.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that. It was up for 38 years. Are you sure?
I saw something about it. It's almost.
Wait, am I saying 38? I mean 28. It was up for 71, 80. Yeah, it was up for 28 years. You're right.
So,
it's been up for 29 years.
year.
That must have just happened. Oh, that's funny. I never thought of that. Yeah.
It was actually, I heard the story, but Putin was actually a KGB agent at this time.
Yeah.
He was working in a KGB, in a Russian intelligence facility, and they were just like attacking all Russian buildings and stuff. And he was the guy attacked was like he had like shoveled documents into the fire. Like he got like all their just like secret intelligence and just burned the whole thing. And a lot of people say that's like the one thing Putin is really afraid of: people rising up against the government, because at that time he just had no idea what to do. Like he was just there's like 5 agents in there, and like
I mean,
hundreds of people.
all of
just,
his
like,
major
banging on the doors.
opposers end up dead.
Yeah.
When
he Putin walks really weird because of KGB training. He walks with his right hand doesn't sway because they had their service pistol right here, so
I've
he
never
walks
heard
like
that.
this.
Really?
Yeah, it's really weird. It's like people have all these weird.
Also, he's really short. He's as tall as me. He's 5'7".
Also, he when he tried to one of the things that kind of instilled a fear into him is when he tried to contact Moscow about what to do, they didn't respond. Like
They just shut down all
basically,
communication.
they did not reply to any of his communications. So here he is.
Wait, was he working in West Berlin or East Berlin?
East Berlin, but
Was he working in
here
East
he
or West
is.
Berlin?
He was East Berlin and some. Here he is. Hundreds of people marching on the KGB intelligence, trying to get contact from what he thought were the people that are supposed to always be out there for him, and they do not respond.
Interesting. So Heidi, 70. Oh yeah, what do you got? I'm sorry.
The orchestra teacher from my old school was happened to be in Berlin when it fell.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So Heidi was 79 when this thing fell, and what happened when it fell? Oh, there's another picture. What happened when it fell is East Berlin got westernized like that, just like that. You got like Coca-Cola and Burger King, right? So. On that night of November 9th, people were really just like going to West Berlin and seeing things they've never seen before, like stuff like this. Now there's a really good movie about this. It's in German, so you have to watch it with the subtitles, but it's called Goodbye Lenin. And here's the premise of this movie. It's 1989. The wall hasn't fallen yet. And there's this son and daughter who are like in their early 20s, and their mom is like super pro-communist, because there were people who loved communism. Here's an interesting fact. They went back to East Berlin about 10 years after the wall fell and surveyed people and asked, would you like the wall back? And about 20% of the people said yes. Now, 80% were perfectly happy with Burger King and all that stuff. But 20% of the people liked it, right? Like, there was no unemployment under communism. Everybody had a job. Everybody was kind of poor, but everybody was kind of poor together, right? So that, 20% is not high, but that's not insignificant, right? Yeah. So this movie, Goodbye Lenin, the mom's like super pro-communist, and she goes into a coma. I can't even remember how. She falls down or something, and she goes into a coma. And while she's in the coma, the wall falls.
Oh.
And then when she wakes up, the doctors are like, oh, we've got to be very careful with her. We don't want to startle her, or she could go back into coma. So the son and the daughter have to fool her into thinking that it's still under communism. And it's a really creative way of showing how fast things change. Because pretty quickly, they couldn't even get the communist coffee anymore. They couldn't even get the communist products. They had to play old news tapes and things like that. And it even gets to the point where she even sees signs of the West out of her window in her apartment. You know what I mean? As things change really rapidly. So it's probably in my top 10 favorite movies of all time, but it's a really good movie to see if you're interested in it. Goodbye Lenin.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So she's 79, right? And all of a sudden, after living 28 years, I kept saying 38 today, but it's 28 years under communism, the West just invades. And not just does the West invade, but remember all those hipsters and artists living in West Berlin? Now they're all like, oh man, I'm gonna move to East Berlin. It's even cheaper over there, right? So they all move into the East. So now she's got graffiti over every building, right? She went from the bland commie block apartment buildings to this everywhere, right? Oh, I should tell you about JFK in a minute too.
Reagan.
That's
Someone drew that?
Reagan and JFK.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's awesome graffiti on the Berlin Wall, and it just changes all the time. This is what the buildings look like in Berlin now, right?
That's
Plus,
so cool, man.
so here's this. These are pictures that I took. This is like a squat where people were living in here. They've probably been living in there for decades. Here's inside of a squat.
there?
I went there a lot of times when I worked for the company in Paris. we had a sister company in Berlin, so I'd end up there about once a year for like meetings or training stuff or whatever it was.
From what time period?
I was there a lot from 2003 to 2009.
I was born out of
so, and I've kind of got a lot of friends there that work for that company.
2002, baby.
Here's inside one of these buildings. And plus, she's got these people living next door to her, right? Under communism, everybody wears the same pants. Everybody wears the same shirt. And then all of a sudden, by like, within a year, she's got like mohawks and purple hair living next door to her, right? And then she lives next door to this place, right? And they don't even start until 4 in the morning. You know what I mean? So, like, when I used to ride around Berlin, in the early 2000s, we used to actually talk about this. Like, there's people up in these buildings who lived through all the communist stuff. And they've got to just look down on modern day Berlin and be like, this is the weirdest ever, right? Like, that must have just been like the weird, like all that stuff she would have seen in her life, right? And Berlin, since the wall fell, I mean, again, before World War II, it was like one of the largest cities in the world. And it just today is starting to get its population back. Even when I was there 10 years ago, like, it still had tons of empty buildings. And Berlin is such a funny place because, like, if you walk down any just given street in Berlin, this is what you'll see. You'll see one building that's like completely bombed out from World War II. Like, it's got like one wall of the 4 that used to be there. The next building will be like this new, modern, crazy-looking building that was built in like 1997. Next door to that, you're gonna have like a communist block apartment, and they're all covered in graffiti, right? Like, that is Berlin. Berlin is just crazy, right? Let's see, let me tell you the story. Oh man, Mandarin kids are gonna have to go. Huh?
Yeah.
Oh!
This thing's still recording, so.
Okay, leave it on. I'll post this. You guys can watch it.
All right.
Hey, one other thing I was thinking might be fun for you guys is my slideshow. I'll share this with all of you. So if you want to go try to teach this to your parents. Oh, the camera fell!
Oh, shoot.
Pearson! That's okay.
Pearson.